Ashley Floor, and you know what I'm talking about here on my channel right now.
Hi besties, welcome back. Today we need to talk about something that completely shifts the energy of this entire situation, because the one person who was supposed to be Blake Lively's strongest ally on this film may have just become her biggest liability. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. If you've been following this story from the beginning, you already know that Blake didn't just walk onto this set as an actress. She walked in with influence, with expectations, and with very specific protections in place. And one of the biggest of those protections revolved around a woman named Alex Sachs. Next to Josh Greenstein, Alex was arguably Blake's most important internal supporter during production. Blake believed that with Alex positioned as a lead female producer, amplified, empowered, publicly backed, the two of them together would have enough leverage to shape the environment the way they wanted. That was the strategy. That was the safety net. That was the power alignment Blake pushed for Wayfarer to elevate Alex's role. She wanted her empowered, visible, strengthened in authority. Because in Blake's mind, if Alex had more control, Blake would have more control. If Alex had influence in the producer's chair, Blake would have influence in every major decision. It wasn't just about credit. It was about structure. It was about making sure the power dynamic on set tilted in a direction Blake felt comfortable with. And at the time, it probably looked like a smart move. Align with another woman in leadership. Present unity. Present strength. Present a front that can't easily be dismissed, but here's where the narrative starts to fracture, because what Blake may not have realized, or maybe didn't want to see, is that Alex wasn't operating on one track. While Blake believed they were locked in as a united front, evidence suggests Alex was communicating very differently behind closed doors. On one side, she was reassuring Blake, listening to complaints, nodding along, validating frustrations, acting like the supportive ally who understood the concerns about control, about tone, about the environment on set. But on the other side, she was also speaking to Wayfarer executives. Speaking to Jamie. Speaking to Justin. And in those conversations, the tone appears to have shifted. Instead of pure solidarity, there were criticisms. Concerns about Blake's growing list of demands. Frustration about control battles. Commentary about how difficult certain negotiations had become. That's not speculation pulled from thin air. That becomes clear when we fast forward to August 2024, when the pressure intensified and the situation started moving toward legal territory. By that point, public narratives were forming. Articles were being drafted. Reputations were on the line. And Ryan Reynolds, who had been deeply involved behind the scenes, wanted reinforcement. He wanted public corroboration. Specifically, he wanted Alex to speak, even if only anonymously. Even if only on background. He believed that if Alex confirmed what Blake had been saying, even subtly, it would strengthen the credibility of their side, but that's not what happened. On August 15th, Ryan sent a text message acknowledging something that clearly frustrated him. Alex wasn't willing to speak. Not publicly. Not even anonymously. Not even as a background source. And that refusal matters. Because when someone who was supposedly present, supposedly aware, supposedly supportive declines to back you up, that sends a message. Warren Zavala communicated that Alex had been walking things back in conversations with him and Jamie. And that phrase, walking things back, is everything. It implies prior alignment that is now being softened. It implies earlier statements that are no longer being held with the same confidence. According to Warren, the heart of Alex's hesitation wasn't necessarily that she didn't believe Blake. He said she believed Blake and Jenny's accounts emotionally. But belief and witness are not the same thing. Alex did not personally observe many of the incidents being described. She had been told about them. She had been relayed second-hand complaints. She had experienced moments of tension herself. But when it came to directly corroborating specific allegations, that's where the foundation weakened. She couldn't verify what she didn't see. And in a courtroom, that distinction becomes critical. Ryan's response to that hesitation was telling. He questioned why Alex couldn't at least speak anonymously. Why she couldn't simply advocate for Blake in a limited way. Because from their perspective, Blake felt isolated. She felt like no one inside the production structure was publicly standing beside her. Warren even acknowledged that concern, that it appeared none of her colleagues were advocating for her openly. But here's the uncomfortable reality they were running into: contracts. These weren't just friends gossiping to tabloids. These were professionals bound by agreements. Non-disparagement clauses. NDAs. Production contracts that restrict what can be said publicly about collaborators. If Alex stepped forward and began criticizing her production partners, she wouldn't just be making a moral statement, she'd be risking her career. The entertainment industry is smaller than it looks from the outside. Reputations travel fast. If a producer becomes known for publicly trashing collaborators or leaking confidential on-set dynamics, studios notice. Executives remember. Opportunities quietly disappear. Alex was in a position where speaking out could label her as disloyal or unprofessional. Even if she believed parts of Blake's story, confirming it publicly could mean violating agreements. It could mean being perceived as someone who fuels internal conflict. And that's a dangerous brand in Hollywood. So when Blake needed vocal defenders, Alex chose caution. Then came the deposition. And this is where everything truly unravels, because once you're under oath, you can't lean on vibes or alignment or friendship. You're required to answer precisely. And when Alex was questioned, a pattern emerged, one that Blake's legal team likely did not anticipate. Over and over again, when asked about specific incidents, Alex responded the same way: "I don't remember." She couldn't recall which scene Steve Sarowitz was present for on set. She vaguely remembered a warehouse space, possibly toward the end of the day, but no specifics. She couldn't remember which days she missed during promotional events. She couldn't recall whether there was a third-party HR representative on set. When asked about a February 2023 meeting where Justin Baldoni allegedly yelled at her, she admitted she didn't remember much beyond reading an email about it. She couldn't quote his words. She couldn't describe the tone. She couldn't even clearly recall if he apologized afterward. And when questioning shifted to Blake's complaints, that's when the memory gaps became even more glaring. Did Blake tell her Justin commented on her physical appearance? She doesn't remember the exact language. Did Blake specify where it happened? She doesn't remember the location. What exactly was said? She doesn't recall the words. Was it about a leather jumpsuit? She's unsure. Did Blake express discomfort when a Zoom meeting was recorded? She remembers discomfort generally, but not specifics. Did Blake describe being undressed when someone entered her trailer? She doesn't recall that clearly. Did Blake say she yelled, "No, no, no, don't come in"? She doesn't remember. Over and over again, "I don't recall. I don't remember. I would have to read more. I can't say for certain." Now, there are two possibilities when a witness responds this way. Either she genuinely does not remember, which raises questions about the intensity and clarity of the alleged incidents, or she remembers but is unwilling to commit to a version of events under oath. Because once you state something clearly in a deposition, you are bound to it. If it later contradicts evidence, you face perjury risks. And perjury is not theoretical. It carries fines. It carries potential jail time. No professional is going to risk that for someone else's narrative. So instead, the safest legal answer becomes, "I don't recall." That phrase is a shield. It prevents you from lying. It prevents you from fully contradicting someone. It keeps you neutral. And neutrality, in a high-stakes legal dispute, can feel like betrayal to the side that expected loyalty. What makes this especially damaging for Blake's case is that Alex wasn't just a random coworker. She was positioned as a key ally. A female producer who was supposed to validate Blake's concerns about environment, tone, and respect. If Alex had firmly stated, "Yes, I witnessed this," or "Yes, Blake told me this immediately and I believed her," that would strengthen Blake's argument. But instead, Alex distanced herself from specifics even in moments that could have been framed as clearly problematic. Alex softened the interpretation. Take the weight question incident. Justin allegedly asked Blake's trainer about her weight because he had a back injury and needed to lift her during intimate scenes. In public framing, that could be spun as body shaming. But under oath, Alex acknowledged understanding the practical reason behind the question. She said she didn't find it inherently offensive from a production standpoint. She described it as possibly insensitive, given Blake had recently had a baby and might have felt insecure, but not malicious. Not harassment. Not an intentional attempt to shame. That nuance matters, because legal thresholds for harassment require more than awkward or insensitive moments. They require behavior that meets specific criteria. And when even sympathetic witnesses characterize incidents as misunderstandings or poorly phrased but practical questions, it weakens the severity of the claim. What's becoming clear is that Alex is not willing to escalate these moments into legal violations. She's not willing to label Justin a misogynist. She's not willing to describe him as intentionally harmful. She's not willing to say she felt unsafe. She's not willing to frame her experiences in extreme terms, and that creates a serious problem for Blake if this case ever reaches trial. Because juries pay attention to consistency. They watch body language. They listen for confidence. A witness repeatedly saying, "I don't remember," does not create emotional momentum. It creates doubt. It creates the impression that the events were either less significant than described or that internal narratives shifted over time. And meanwhile, other women connected to the production, Jenny, Angie, others, have reportedly either declined to sue or stated that their issues were resolved and did not meet legal harassment standards. That doesn't automatically invalidate Blake's experience, but it isolates it. When multiple people present during the same production environment describe events as uncomfortable but not illegal, and one person frames them as severe misconduct, jurors start asking questions, and here's the reality Blake is facing: no one is going to risk perjury for her. No one is going to stake their career, finances, and legal safety on backing a version of events they cannot fully verify. Friendship doesn't override federal law. Professional alliances don't override sworn testimony. Alex may have once amplified Blake's concerns internally. She may have vented frustrations about Justin. She may have participated in power struggles. But when it came time to lock statements into legal record, she stepped into the safest possible lane: limited memory, minimal specificity, neutral tone, and that shift, from outspoken ally to cautious witness, could be the turning point in this entire saga. What this means for trial strategy, public perception, and the long-term fallout if this actually sees a courtroom. Now let's talk about what this actually means moving forward, because the courtroom is a completely different battlefield than a film set or a press cycle. When you're in production, conversations are fluid. People vent. People exaggerate. People align and realign depending on who they're speaking to. But once depositions start and testimony is locked in, everything crystallizes. Every inconsistency becomes a weapon. Every "I don't remember" becomes a strategic focal point. If this case were to move toward trial, Blake's legal team would need strong, clear, confident corroboration. Not vague recollections. Not emotional belief without first-hand knowledge. They would need witnesses who could say, under oath, "Yes, I saw that happen. This is exactly what was said. This is when it happened. This is how it made me feel." Instead, what they have from Alex is hesitation. Fragmented memory. A pattern of distancing herself from definitive claims, and juries notice patterns when a witness repeatedly claims not to remember major events, especially events that were allegedly serious enough to require protections and power restructuring. It subtly suggests that the moments may not have registered as extreme at the time. If something is truly traumatic or deeply inappropriate, most people remember it with clarity. They remember where they were standing. They remember tone. They remember who else was present. The absence of those details doesn't automatically mean nothing happened, but it opens the door for reasonable doubt from a defense standpoint. That doubt is everything. If Justin's legal team were to cross-examine Alex at trial, the questioning would likely focus on consistency. They would walk her through her earlier communications, texts, emails, internal messages, and compare them line by line with her deposition answers. If she previously expressed strong frustration but now claims limited memory, that contrast becomes powerful. It allows the defense to argue that emotions were heightened in the moment, but the actual conduct didn't meet legal standards. And remember, this isn't just about whether someone felt uncomfortable. the law requires a certain threshold for harassment. It has to be severe or pervasive enough to alter working conditions. It has to be more than a single insensitive remark or awkward exchange. Even Alex, when pressed about the weight question, acknowledged the practical context. She admitted she understood why Justin would need to know for lifting scenes. She described it as possibly insensitive, given Blake's postpartum body insecurities, but not malicious. That distinction is critical. Insensitive is not illegal. Awkward is not harassment. Poorly phrased is not predatory. That nuance could shift the entire case. Then there's the issue of internal credibility. If Blake's own closest production ally won't firmly validate her claims, opposing counsel would absolutely highlight that. They would emphasize that Alex had every opportunity to back Blake up, no apparent loyalty conflict, no visible hostility, and yet she chose neutrality. They would ask why someone who supposedly supported Blake's push for greater control would suddenly become non-committal when facts are required. It also raises uncomfortable questions about internal strategy during filming. Was there a coordinated effort to frame events in a certain light to justify power shifts? Did frustrations about creative control morph into narratives of misconduct? That's not something a jury would be told outright, but it's something they might infer if testimony feels rehearsed, inconsistent, or selective. And here's another layer: public perception versus legal reality. In the court of public opinion, stories move quickly. Headlines don't require evidentiary thresholds. Social media reactions don't demand sworn statements. But in an actual courtroom, evidence is dissected slowly and methodically. Emotional narratives are filtered through legal definitions. If multiple women connected to the production, Jenny, Angie, others, state that while certain moments felt uncomfortable, they did not rise to the level of harassment, that collective perspective becomes persuasive. It complicates the idea that there was a systemic hostile environment. Even Jenny reportedly indicated her issues were resolved and did not warrant legal action. Angie explicitly stated she did not believe the behavior met the threshold of sexual harassment. Alex, despite early alignment with Blake, refused to frame incidents as intentional misconduct. When you line those positions up side by side, Blake's version becomes more isolated, and isolation in litigation is dangerous because a jury doesn't just evaluate whether something could have happened. They evaluate whether it more likely than not happened as described. If every surrounding witness softens the narrative, doubt grows. And doubt benefits the defense. There's also the financial and reputational risk for everyone involved. Trials are unpredictable. Discovery processes expose private communications. Text messages become exhibits. Emails get projected onto courtroom screens. If this proceeds, every behind-the-scenes conversation between Blake, Alex, Ryan, producers, and executives could be examined in detail. That means tone, intent, and shifting alliances would all become part of the record. For Alex, staying neutral protects her long-term career. She avoids branding herself as either a whistleblower or a collaborator in alleged misconduct. She maintains relationships on both sides. That may look disloyal from Blake's perspective, but from a professional standpoint, it's strategic survival. And let's talk about perjury for a moment, because it's not an abstract threat. When you testify under oath, false statements can carry criminal penalties. Fines. Possible jail time. Permanent damage to credibility. No one, not even a close colleague, is worth that risk. If Alex cannot say with absolute certainty that she personally witnessed harassment as legally defined, she cannot ethically state that she did. So I don't recall becomes the safest honest answer when memory is unclear or when events were less dramatic than later described. If this case never reaches trial and settles privately, this deposition pattern may remain largely invisible to the public. But if it does go before a jury, transcripts like these will matter. They will be quoted. They will be analyzed. They will be contrasted against public statements made earlier in press coverage. Another factor to consider is motive. Defense attorneys often explore why allegations surface at particular moments. If tensions about creative control were high, if there were disputes about leadership, editing authority, promotional direction, those dynamics could be framed as alternative explanations for conflict. It doesn't mean complaints are fabricated, but it introduces complexity. And complexity makes verdicts harder to predict. From Blake's side, the argument would likely center on cumulative discomfort, subtle undermining, and emotional impact rather than overt, dramatic misconduct. But again, cumulative claims require consistent corroboration. Without it, each individual incident looks smaller when isolated, and jurors are instructed to evaluate evidence carefully, not emotionally. There's also the broader cultural conversation about believing women. That phrase often enters public discourse quickly in celebrity disputes. But believing women doesn't mean bypassing evidence. It doesn't mean dismissing other women's testimony when it contradicts a preferred narrative. If Angie and Jenny and Alex all provide statements that do not fully align with Blake's framing, the question becomes complicated. Whose account carries more weight? The one asserting misconduct, or the multiple voices describing misunderstandings? That's not a simple moral equation. It's a legal one. Blake may have initially felt confident that internal allies would stand firmly beside her if matters escalated. She may have believed that shared frustrations would translate into shared testimony. But frustrations during production are common. Power struggles are common. Emotional reactions are common. Turning those into legally sustainable harassment claims is far more difficult. If this does proceed, Blake's team will likely need to pivot strategy. They may focus less on extreme allegations and more on workplace culture concerns. They may introduce expert testimony about postpartum sensitivity, power dynamics, or gender bias in creative spaces. They may argue that even if individual moments seem minor, the pattern created an environment that undermined her authority and comfort. But without first-hand corroboration, that argument becomes uphill. Meanwhile, Just Inside would emphasize practical explanations. Production logistics. Injury precautions. Miscommunications. Resolve disputes. They would highlight apologies where they occurred. They would stress the absence of formal HR complaints meeting legal thresholds. And they would repeatedly return to the deposition transcript where the supposed star witness declines to confirm key claims. It's not dramatic courtroom television. It's slow, technical dismantling of certainty. And that's why this moment with Alex is so pivotal. It's not just about loyalty. It's about evidentiary weight. A star witness who cannot remember critical details does not strengthen a case. At best, she becomes neutral. At worst, she opens the door for cross-examination that erodes confidence in the entire narrative. For Blake, that's a serious vulnerability. For the production companies involved, it may be a quiet relief. Because legal exposure decreases when corroboration weakens. Settlement leverage shifts. Negotiation dynamics change. At the end of the day, trials are won on clarity and consistency. Right now, clarity is missing. Consistency is fractured. And if no one is willing to step forward and firmly anchor Blake's version under oath, the path to victory becomes narrow. This situation reminds everyone in Hollywood of a simple truth: private alliances do not always survive public litigation. When reputations, contracts, and legal consequences enter the picture, self-preservation often outweighs solidarity. If this reaches a courtroom, it will no longer be about press headlines or social media narratives. It will be about transcripts, sworn answers, and credibility. And based on what we've seen so far, credibility is exactly where the tension lies. We'll have to watch carefully to see whether new evidence surfaces or whether positions continue to soften. But as it stands, the witness who was expected to be a cornerstone may have quietly stepped back into the shadows, and that changes everything.